Hi everyone, welcome back to week 2, and we're still on the fundamentals of instruction. We're taking on task B today, the learning process. And with this learning process, we've talked about human behavior, we've talked about effective communication. This particular lesson today is going to deal on how your student learns. So without further ado, this is the longest one. We're going to go ahead and start. Highly suggested that after about 20 minutes you pause these. I will have about every 20 minutes or so, I'll actually have like an intermission. I know I talked about it on this first one, but I didn't put them in because it ended up being not that long. But this one I'll have an intermission about every 20 minutes or so, okay? So that way you won't get burned out on the lesson. All right, without further ado, I am going to do a full-blown teaching today on the learning learning process. So I will be talking at a great extent about this information. Please follow along with me in your practical test standards. You can turn to Area of Operation 2, Task Bravo, and follow along with me. You will actually see that I hit each point on the way down in sequence, so it should not be that difficult to follow along with me. And here we go. So today we're going to be talking about the learning process. And the learning process is what is imposed upon a student when they're trying to learn material, or anyone when they're trying to learn something. And so the first thing we have to understand is, what is this learning thing? What is learning? Well, learning is a change in behavior as a result of experience. Meaning, if you don't have the experience, there's no way you could have ever learned. Everything that you have actually comes from learning. And with learning, we have these different theories that we go into to explain why someone learns or how someone learns. And so the very first one we'll talk about, that's located in your textbook, or in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, is what I refer to as your textbook, is the theory of behaviorism. Now, behaviorism explains behavior from an observable and measurable response to stimuli. I think probably the most interesting one from this is the one that's actually based off of, which is Pavlov's dogs. So if you're not familiar with this one, there was a scientist. He was doing some work with animals. He was not a psychologist at the time, or in dealing with that field of science. And he was doing some experiments on the salivation glands for canines. And so every day, let's just say at 4 o'clock every day, he would ring a bell and he would throw out a piece of meat for the dogs. And they had this little cup around their neck, and he could measure the salivation for the dogs during this time. One day, after conditioning these dogs to this bell, he accidentally rang the bell, but it wasn't 4 o'clock and there wasn't any meat. The dogs came around. Dogs had a lot of spit in their collection box. And he's like, well, this is neat. It's not 4 o'clock. I don't have any meat out here. Why are they salivating like this? Well, the bottom line is that they had got conditioned to a response, and that's what they were expecting. And we have a lot of things in life that we are like this with. And in the learning process with our students, it's very important that we study behaviorism and understand that there is if we give positive stimuli, then we get a positive result. If we give negative stimuli, we could have a negative result. And let's go on to the next one. It's called information processing theory. There's a total of 4 of these, by the way. We've talked about behaviorism. Information processing theory, it talks about how the human mind is kind of like a computer. So we have to receive input in from the computer. So how do you put things in the computer? Well, we can use a microphone, or we can use a mouse, or we could use a camera, or we could use a keyboard, trackball, all different kind of things. We could put input into the camera or into the computer. How do we receive input into our computers? Well, we use our 5 senses. We hear, see, smell, taste, feel, and all of these things go in to kind of register what we're doing. And as a computer is running, it's every single aspect with the computer, every keystroke, every mouse movement is all registered in like a local memory. It's called RAM. With us, it's our short-term and sensory memory. And every time we reboot the computer, the RAM dumps, or turn the computer off, the RAM dumps, and there's gone. And so that's our short-term and sensory memory. But what if we want to keep that information for a long period of time on the computer? Well, I can store this video onto the hard drive, or in our bodies, we store them in our long-term memory. And so that is the information processing theory, is how does our body, how does our mind work as like a computer? And we're going to talk about that even more as we get into the lesson. The next theory is called cognitive theory. Now, this is kind of like the backbone behind everything, cognitive theory. And cognitive, whenever you think of that word cognitive or hear that word cognitive, what you're thinking of is how, what happens inside the brain. What's going on? Why did they do that? Well, that's cognitive theory that you're thinking about. You're thinking about cognitive theory, that's cognitive. You're alert. You're what's going on in the mind. What's your brain thinking about? What's going on in that? And the backbone of this course and psychology nowadays is based off the cognitive theory. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along through the course. The last one is called constructivism. Kind of like what its name represents, or what you think its name may represent, construction, constructivism. So you learn off of prior experience. So you have an experience, and then something may happen to kind of change that experience, and then you keep going and going and going and going on. A young child sees a nice bright eye on the stove, and they go touch the stove and they get burned. And the burn heals up, and they're well now, and several months have gone, several weeks have gone by, several months have gone by, and they know that they don't touch the red hot eye. And then one day the mother has just turned off, or the parent has just turned something off from being cooked, and the child touches the just turned off eye, which has now went from red to black but still hot, touches it, gets burnt again. Now the child's like, wait a minute, I'm confused. Red's hot. Are you trying to tell me black is hot too? Because I thought black was cold. And then at Christmas time, the child receives like a fake kitchenette for fake cooking, to play cook. And the child sees that there's a plastic stovetop, and it has a sticker on it, and the sticker's red to represent a hot eye on a stove. The child won't touch the red. Why? Because they see it's a stove, they don't know it's fake. They see the stove, they see it red, and they don't want to touch it. And so then the parent has to prove that, hey, this is not hot. And so now the child is really confused. Well, red hot, black hot, red not really hot. So that's that constructivism as it goes through. Things change, we learn with previous experience and prior experience. And this really works good for us. If we talk about how we, as instructors, how we come through, we get better as instructors over a period of time. Students get better over time. Pilots get better over time because we build off of prior experiences, and that's called constructivism. Now, we talked about the cognitive level of learning and the information processing theory, and we talked about how we learn from our senses. So let's go ahead and talk about perceptions and what they mean to us. So perceptions is how we sense the world around us. And so if I'm looking at something, or if I'm seeing something, hearing something, touching something, smelling something, tasting something, we have an ability to be able to draw perceptions based off of what we know. For example, I come home at the end of the day and I walk in the door to my house and I'm like, Nestle Toll House cookies. And I walk into the kitchen. My wife is at the island of the kitchen. There's the KitchenAid blenders out. It's running. There's flour. There's little cutting devices. There's baking accessories out. My wife, she's standing there. She's got her little cooking apron on. She's got her hair up, her red lipstick on. It's my fantasy. It's my fantasy. Let it go. Anyway, so I say, "Where's my cookies?" And she goes, "What cookies are you talking about?" And I go, "I smell chocolate chip cookies." And she goes, No, idiot. That's not cookies. That's the new candles I bought today from Bed Bath & Beyond called Chocolate Chip Delight. And then I'm kind of sad because I don't get cookies. But everything was telling me cookies. I smelt it. That was a pretty big one. Prior experience telling me cookies around. I go in there, I see the oven on, I see the stuff out there to to bake sweets. I'm assuming there's cookies, but my perceptions were incredibly wrong. But why? Why did my perceptions say that? Well, my perceptions was based off of something that I knew from a previous task. And when you are learning, wow, you have to tell a student what they're seeing or what they're smelling. Or imagine if you didn't know what low lead smelled like. Could you properly identify a low lead leak in the airplane while flying? No, you could not. What if I was in a multi-engine airplane that had a retractable landing gear, or in an airplane with retractable landing gear, and I come in and the gear's not down? Would I be able to see a light or hear an audible warning? What if I never told my student what that light meant? What if I never told my student what that warning horn meant? They would not have perceived that that is a good thing or a bad thing. So perceptions, wow, they're everything to us. We must tell the student everything that goes on because they don't know. So we have to tell them everything. And that is a change in behavior as a result of experience. And if they have the improper perceptions, then this is not going to go well. The more senses that we have, the better the experience. So if you could see me, hear me, converse with me, your learning experience would be better. If you just hear a podcast, it may not be enough. If you hear, talk, interrupt with another person, that's probably a little bit better form of learning. So the more senses, the absolute better with that. However, along the way, as we're trying to have these perceptions going on, it's not always going to be as easy as it seems, because there are actually some factors that will affect the way that we actually perceive things. Like, for instance, we have an acronym called G-STEP. G-S-T-E-P. A G-STEP stands for goals and values. Well, if I just came out of a big school that ab initio, went so fast through this school, I got my everything done in like 9 months. I'm just out there and I'm working in the field. But I left this big school and went to work for a small mom and pop school. And I'm at the mom and pop school, and this person comes in like, hey, I'm a local business owner. I'd like to look at flight training. And you're like, sure. And you start trying to shove things down this person's neck, like you were shoving things, like you had stuff shoved down your neck at this ab initio 0 to hero in 9 months, 6 to 9 months program that you just came out of. This person just wants to go out and have fun. They don't want to have things shoved down their neck and try to tell them they need to get finished as quickly as possible. And your check ride's in 3 weeks, and you got to do the Shepherd Air thing, and you got to be ready for your test tomorrow afternoon. Their goals and values are not aligned with that. They won't do that. Just like in retro, there's going to be goals and values associated with an ab initio student that would not work for, that wouldn't work for someone who came from this mom and pop world into that arena as well. So these goals and values things are pretty important, and you as an instructor have to be aware of what the goals and values of your student are, so that way you can properly make sure that these things are aligned the way you want them to. Self-concept. What if somebody has like an Eeyore self-concept? Oh, bother. It doesn't really matter. I'm never going to get this. All is lost. You have a responsibility as an instructor to put an X-nay on that. You have to stop that, and you have to nip that in the bud. And you have to say, hey, look, this is something that you could achieve. It's not that far off. But if they have that negative self-concept about something, their perception about why they may need it or why it's important may not be relative to them. I don't want to do spins. Why? Because I think they're unsafe, and I think that there's no reason for me to learn how to do a spin. If I properly learn how to identify a stall and recognize a stall, I will never have to worry about spinning an airplane. Well, your perceptions are wrong. That's not correct. You can't always judge a student saying that they're always going to do the right thing. That's not correct. One of the other things that could affect your students' perceptions is time and opportunity. If I never give you the time and the opportunity to properly study something, properly learn something, you are not going to properly learn it. The perceptions are not going to be there. You're not going to have the experience that you need to have, and learning will not take place because perception has not taken place. So you must give them time and opportunity. Like, for instance, I couldn't simply tell you, go home and read the Airplane Flying Handbook and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. No, you can't do that. That's not the time or opportunity. There's no time and opportunity to do that with a student. That cannot be done. What's the sad part? I hear those stories all the time, and they're just not good instructors that do that. Element of threat. So the element of threat can affect perception, like we talked about with the spin. That could be a way that we have this element of threat as well. So what if the person sees that there is some type of threat in something and it will affect their ability to be able to learn it? Remember, we talked about in the very first part of task A that this fear can enable the fight or flight syndrome. So this fear thing is a very real thing, and we can't allow that to take place. So unlike the goals and values, if they have the element of threat in there, they're thinking it's a danger, not necessarily saying that they don't want to learn it because of that. They just see it as a danger. So they may actually have one or more of these items taking place at one time. Physical organism. We talked earlier about the 5 senses are basically providing the input to us like a computer does, right? But what if your 5 senses are askewed? Like, are you sick? Is your sniffer stopped up? Is your eyesight bad? Is your hearing bad? You may not be able to properly perceive things. So if your physical organism is not working correctly, you may have some problems with your ability to properly perceive things. Now, we have the 5 senses, and it forms perceptions. When we have multiple perceptions, we end up forming something called insights. And insights are perceptions that are grouped together into a meaningful whole. When I first take someone out to do a traffic pattern, I must give them perception. Hey, you see that paint? Don't go across the paint. You see that double line followed by the dash line? Don't go across that. So I'm looking at them. I'm telling them. I'm showing them. They're seeing it. What is that? And then they're speaking it. That's the whole short line. Very good. Very good. So I'm giving them all of these perceptions to be drawn. So there's the whole short line. What's the perception to be drawn off that? Don't go past the whole short line unless you clear the traffic, or you hear from ATC that you're good to go, and then still you're going to look. It's a lot of the 5 senses being used, isn't it? Absolutely, a lot of the 5 senses being used. So insight would be the entire circuit. Like, why are we doing this? What are we doing? If you have a student that is not being kept receptive of new experiences that are happening to them, they will not be able to draw an insight on this item because their perceptions has been flawed. So you as the instructor have an obligation to ensure that the perceptions are there, that the insights are there. Those are very, very, very important. After we accumulate some of the insights, we can put those together to have a larger portion of that called a building block. And the building blocks are actually quite simple. It's basically every single section of the PTS. Takeoff and landings, that's a building block. It goes into forming something a little bit bigger, which is the traffic pattern. So these building blocks can be pretty big. Performance maneuvers, building block. Slow flight, building block. Emergency, building block. So those are your building blocks that you go through to be able to do that. But the thing that we still have here is this is learning. So is there like a specific step to learning that we have to do? Absolutely. Absolutely 100%. We're going to talk about this in two different forms. One is the steps that we actually use to acquire knowledge. And there are three different steps, three distinct steps to acquiring knowledge. So in general, any knowledge being acquired is done in these three different ways. The first, the acronym here that we have, is MUC, M-U-C. So when you first start learning, the order's kind of mucky. So MUC is the way I memorize it, and the M is memorization. So whenever I start learning something, I have to do the memorization. We start from a very small child and we do that. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on and so on. I know you're not here to hear me sing, but I was pretty good, wasn't I? Anyway, and we memorize that. And we memorize that long before they understand what it's for. So the first step always is memorization. You have to work with your student to understand that they must memorize things. The reason why I give you acronyms, so that way you can memorize the acronyms and eventually you'll take it to the next step. So it's M is our first one. The next one is U, and that's understanding. You're going to organize what you've learned to gain the understanding. So if I am teaching you the traffic pattern, then I have a lot to have you memorize. There is a tremendously large amount to memorize, especially if I take you from right off of the taxi, the ramp area, all the way out for your departure, full stop landing, and taxi back to the ramp. Wow, what a tremendously large amount of stuff to memorize. And then to understand each one of those functions. Wow. That's a big chore. That's a big undertaking to what you would have to do. Why do we have to stop at the whole short line? Why do we taxi in the middle of the road instead of on the right or left of the road? Why are we on the center line of the road? What is the blue lights? What do the blue lights mean? What does it mean? If I'm on a taxiway and I see white paint, is that a problem? That's a problem because you're on a runway. So these things are very, very important that I know. But I also have to not only memorize it, what yellow means, what white means, what a blue light means. I need to also understand what it means. After that becomes the C, and that's called concept learning. Concept learning is where you use what you know to basically solve problems and make decisions. So let's say that I've memorized the traffic pattern and I'm coming in on final for a landing. I realize that I'm not on a stabilized approach and I'm a little too high. Now my instructor has told me never, ever, ever try to salvage a non-stabilized approach. So I have this up in my head. I need to react on this because this is a non-stabilized approach. What will I do? What can I do? Well, this is an emergency and I have no engine and I'm high. I only have one option, and that's to get into this field because I can't do a go-around. So what are my options? Well, I could do a forward slip. I could put in more flaps. Wow, there's a lot of things you can do. And I could still land the plane. Okay, well, I'm not. I'm actually making an approach into a normal airport or to an airport. What are my options here? Well, I could go around. So the concept learning is very, very important when I'm trying to make decisions. We don't want our student to just have one thing they can do. We're going to have multiple different things they can do. And then their aeronautical decision-making skills go through the roof. Because ADM and concept learning can only evolve if they have more things that they have learned to be able to know what they need to know. And that's called concept learning. So, as we are learning with our students, and our student is learning, you as an instructor, if you make use of the basic laws of learning, it will definitely help you as an instructor to help your student learn quicker and better. And we have different laws of learning. The acronym here is called REPIR, R-E-E-P-I-R. And the first R stands for the law of readiness. Now, a lot of people think that the law of readiness means that you come to class, you have your paper in front of you, your pencil sharpened, you're in your best attire, you're there, you're ready, and you're like, okay, I'm ready. What What do you want to talk about first? That is not the law of readiness. Law of readiness is mental. Are you mentally ready to start this learning process? Are you? Are you watching this video and are you mentally ready to start this learning process with me? If you're not, then nothing I say on this video series is going to do you a daggum bit of good. You have to tell yourself, I am ready to learn this. I want to do this. I can be successful. You have to have that. What if you don't have that? Whose responsibility is it to get you there? This guy. I'm responsible because I'm your instructor. So it's very, very important that we do that. The law of exercise is important because every time you meet your student as an instructor, you should kind of pick up what you talked about last time. That's the law of exercise. Basically using the information day after day or week after week or whatever you have, whatever your learning experience is. And the more you use it, the more it'll be retained. And so that is the law of exercise. The law of effect. Now the law of effect is probably one of the biggest ones in the industry, which is not really adhered to a lot because the instructors just don't know how to deal with people. How many of you watching this video has ever had an instructor that just wasn't a people person? Yeah, the number's actually kind of high and it's pretty bad. So the law of effect states that the learning experience is strengthened with a positive experience and weakened by a negative experience. So if you have a bad instructor, you really won't want to learn. And vice versa. That law of effect. Law of primacy. Law of primacy states that things first learned are things that are best remembered. And this is a big one. I love doing seminars and classes in which I debunk a lot of aviation myths. And when I debunk these myths, people say, why would they teach me something like that? And I'm like, I don't know. And I didn't know some of these things. Like, here's one. What's the speed limit above 10,000 feet MSL? Very, very large majority of pilots will tell me that the answer is unlimited. You can go as fast as you want. And to an extent, that's true. Because if you're in a Skyhawk, or if you're in an Archer, or a Diamond DA-20, or something like that, yeah, you can go as fast as you want. You can pull the black knob, push the black knob all the way forward and pull the red knob almost all the way out. Yeah, you can just let the ponies run. But the real answer is Mach 1. Why is it that a lot of instructors don't tell that it's Mach 1? Why do they say it's unlimited or there's not one? Well, because one, they probably didn't know because their instructor didn't tell them. Or two, they just don't feel that the person needs to know that it's Mach 1. Because it's very rare that anything they'll fly as a private pilot, they probably will not exceed Mach 1. And that's the reason why. A lot of other myths out there that people have false. But that sounds like a whole nother video to me. Let's put that on the back burner. Law of intensity. So the law of intensity is used for, like, let's say that I am wanting to do a ground reference maneuver. We'll use that in first. And I put a person on the simulator to try to do a ground reference maneuver. No. Law of intensity says, You've got to really kind of do this in the plane. You really can't do it. Unless it's a really nice sim. Let's say if you're dealing with like a level 6 FTD or higher with a full wrap screen, that may get you. Or if you're in the outside of the FTDs, if you're in a level something simulator, a level D simulator, yeah, you could probably easily turn around a point in that. But a standard simulator, no, you could not probably do it. If it's a level 4 or below FTD, you probably couldn't do it. So what are we stating here? Well, we're stating here that the law of intensity states that you learn best from the real McCoy. Could I teach you pre-flight with a PowerPoint presentation that shows what the item should look like when it's good and what the item should look like when it's bad? Yes, but nothing's going to take the place of the aircraft. The aircraft is the best place to learn in regards to show and tell. So that's the law of intensity. Law of recency. How long ago did you talk about this? Well, it's been months. Well, law of recency is at play, my friend. and we can't do anything until we kind of brush up on what you know, because the law of recency dictates that the most recently that you've learned it, the probably best you'll be able to use it. So those are your laws of learning. Now, remember I told you earlier how this cognitive behavior theory was the backbone of what we have to know? Well, inside of that cognitive domain, inside of that cognitive learning theory, we have some domains inside of that cognitive learning theory. We have three very specific domains we're going to talk about today. One is called the cognitive domain, one's called the affective domain, and the other one's called the psychomotor domain. And these particular domains are going to really talk about how the learning experience is gauged and how it transpires from day one on. How you go through each one of these things and how you feel and what you're thinking and how you're going to do it. So let's start off talking about the cognitive domain. Cognitive deals with the knowledge or the thinking, what's going on inside of a person's head. So I'm getting ready to show you a maneuver. And as I get ready, let's say this whole entire thing I'm going to talk about deals with steep turns. So the maneuver I want to teach is called the steep turn. I've got to think about the cognitive learning theory, and I'm going to go over these domains that I'm going to have to learn within this theory. So with the cognitive domain, what I'm going to be looking at is how the person is going to memorize what needs to be done. So I have to present the lesson to them, and during that time I'm going to be stating some facts, some factual information. I'm going to be talking about things like load factor and the vertical component of lift and overbanking tendency, things that are used to describe steep turns. And as I'm doing this, the student is going to have to start their memorization. And remember, we talked about this when we talked about muck. So how is the student going to do this? Well, normally in this area, they just have to kind of keep talking about things and keep talking about things and keep talking about things, the law of exercise, keep talking about things. And this basically ends up being very rote. So sometimes we can just rote things over and over again. We memorize a specific thing. All right, so when you first roll into this maneuver, I want you to roll into the maneuver to what you think is a 45-degree bank angle, and then I want you to simultaneously hold the pitch up to compensate for the loss of the vertical component of lift. And I make my person memorize that. Although they may not know what they're talking about, I want them to know what to do. So after the rote will come understanding. And just like the understanding in muck is the same here. We have to understand why we're doing that. Why are we, when we bank, why do we have to pitch up in the steep turn? Well, because your loss of vertical component of lift has diminished, and the only way to get that back is to increase our angle of attack or increase airflow over our airfoil to substantiate lift, because that's the only two ways we can get that lift in the airfoil. So we're looking at those theories behind the knowledge is what we want to do there. The next one is the application phase. So I'm actually going to do it. I'm going to go out, do the maneuver, I'm going to apply it, and I want to see that the theory that they've learned can correctly apply to what they're doing. So is this correct? So I bank the airplane like this and then let the airplane just gradually fall. I'm like, ooh, why is that? The student says, oh, because you lost vertical component of lift and you didn't apply the back pressure to compensate for that, so the nose went through the horizon and we started descending. Good. Application complete. Most instructors stop teaching right there. Done. Finished. Not good, because there's one more step you got to go through. And it is called correlation. Correlation is how these elements that you've learned, and elements are all the things within the PTS or the ACS, how do they coordinate with future segments of learning? How can this help you with something else? If I understand slow flight before I do short field landings, will that be a good thing? I think so. If I understand how to climb out at a specific airspeed, can it help me maintain airspeeds at other times? I think so. If I know that pitching is a derivative of an specific airspeed, and power setting as well and configuration, then I will understand how to maintain a specific airspeed. And so that is referred to as correlation. And that's where you have to take this stuff to as an instructor, not just the application phase. You have to say, this is important because eventually this. So try to always get to the correlation, and that will help. The next domain that we have is called the affective domain. Most instructors in most schools don't even touch this with a 10-foot pole. This domain will make you a fabulous instructor because affective domain deals with how a person feels about their training as they go through it. Let's talk about the CFI training and see how the affective domain deals with that. Person comes into the CFI classroom or starts training. They eventually start off in a stage called awareness. So they are open to learning, they are open to the training, they're willing to listen to the instructor, they are aware of what their environment, they're aware of what's going on, and they are there to start this sequence. You may even say that at this particular time that the law of readiness with them would be a little bit higher, or they're on the law of readiness there. After that stage has been complied with, which is the awareness, then we go into response. Response means that the person starts to feel a little bit better about what's going on, and they're able to start doing things like raising hands. They're being they're participating in class a lot more, and this is going to be one of those times where you're like, cool, man. You're starting to participate. That response stage is kicking in. That means you're listening. You're more participating more. Boom. I've done a pretty good job. I've got them going. This is great. So see how I have to work the crowd as an instructor. I can't just stand up and just say a bunch of crap. I've actually got to do my freaking job and get them involved and just get them in there. Get motivated as an instructor. I'm going to teach these people how to do this. And they're going to be good pilots for it. If you do a good job at this, you'll actually get them to the value stage. And they'll start thinking to themselves, this FOI stuff that this Todd guy is talking about, I think I see where he's going with this. I do want to learn more. I do want to be, I accept that this is something that I need to learn. I see the value in it. So then hopefully after you get that value, you can go into the next stage, which is organizing. So they see the value of it, and now they want to start organizing their training into their personal belief system. Now, what is the person's personal belief system? I personally believe that, and then fill in the blank. Well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So I see the value, and I believe, I believe that if I use this, I will actually become a better instructor. I personally believe that. I personally believe if I take these vitamins every day, my health will improve. I believe that. I truly believe this, and so that. So that's where we're at with that. Then, if we can get them to that area, that's pretty good. If we can get them to the next one, which is called integration, just like you think it means integration, you're going to integrate it within something else. I can not only get the student to internalize what they've learned, but I can get them to integrate that into their life. I can actually get them to integrate that into their life. And I think that is wonderful, because that is going to be the point in which I don't have to instruct them as much anymore, because they're going to want to learn and do more and have more things to help them have more instructional enhancement, and the instructional communication will improve. It'll be really good for them. They'll actually start becoming a phenomenal instructor if that can get them to that integration stage. So we've talked about what's going on in their brain. We've talked about how they feel. But what about the act of actually doing the maneuver? Well, that's our psychomotor stuff. And here we have the first thing is this deals with skills. So it is a skill that you're going to teach. And we said steep turns, right? So let's stick with steep turns. So steep turns, they have to be able to see us do it. So as an instructor, if you don't always do these maneuvers when you have a new student, you're not going to be a good instructor because you're not going to be able to do the maneuver correctly. So the student has to be able to observe and see you do it. So the very first stage in psychomotor is observation. The student sees that instructor can do the maneuver and he can do it correctly within standards. After observation is imitation. So you tell the student, okay, now you give it a try, and you let them try it. And they try to imitate you, what you just did. They may not completely understand it, but they're just trying to imitate you as much as possible. After the imitation stage, every time you go back up, you may say, okay, do this or do that. And they may actually be on a solo flight, and they're like, hey, I want to practice a steep turn or something like that. So after imitation comes practice. And the practice can be done with the instructor or without the instructor. It doesn't matter. But the practice has to be done in order for them to actually learn the maneuver, how we do it. So far we've had observation, imitation, practice. If they practice it enough and they get good at it, the maneuver will eventually become habit. And that's our last one, which is habit. So over the handbook says something that's quite confusing if you don't know how to interpret it. But it says the user or the student can perform the skill in about twice the time it takes a professional to do the skill. So when you first start doing it, you can just kind of click through things like this. Let me show you how to do a steep turn. You've probably already done clearing turns before you actually did it, and you do the maneuver and you do it very well, very flowing, very smooth, and then the person kicks in and then they try it, but it takes them longer to get set up and get everything. So about twice the time is actually pretty efficient. I wouldn't say that you have to get out there with a stopwatch and when they get about twice the time, go, yep, you're at the habit stage. Nope, I don't think that would work. So observation, imitation, practice, and habit. Monkey see, monkey do some more till it becomes habit. And that is the psychomotor stage. And if we look at learning from the experience itself, we will see that there are certain characteristics of learning and when it's warranted and when it's taken place and what happens after it is done. So we say that the characteristics of learning, there's an acronym called PEAM, P-E-A-M, and learning is purposeful. Without a purpose, you will not want to learn. You've got to have some type of purpose for understanding. Why are you here? Oh, you want to be a CFI. You want to be a good CFI. Okay, well then purpose has been met. Check. Learning is a result of experience. Remember I told you when we first started this, learning is a change in behavior as a result of experience. If you don't have that experience, you will not be able to learn. Learning is also an active process. So just like the laws of learning state, you have to be able to be in there every day or at least a couple days a week. You kind of be thinking about aviation things because it's an active process. And so you must have your student actively react, active respond. They've got to be able to be in this active process of learning all this material. If you let them take too long off, they're not going to be good. Lastly, learning is multifaceted. Learning is multifaceted is stating that we learn with more than just one sense. We learn of multiple senses, and the more senses that we have, the better it is. So the where was I? Oh yeah, learning is multifaceted. So that means that sometimes with our senses, we just like see something or hear something or smell something, and we're like, that's what that means. Or that's a better way to do that. That's multifaceted. It means that there's more than one way to learn it. And sometimes we just may accidentally learn something that we didn't even need to because learning is so multifaceted. And we learn with our senses when we do this. So in regards to, we talked briefly about the psychomotor domain and it deals with skills. Let's talk a little bit more about skills. How do we acquire this skill knowledge? Well, the very first thing that we'll talk about in that is the stages that you have to go through in order to acquire skill knowledge. Remember that anytime that we think about something or it enters our head, it's always referred to as cognitive something. So if you remember, we had the cognitive learning theory, which all this is based off of, and then we had the cognitive domain. Well, now we're going to have something called the cognitive stage of skill acquisition. This acronym is CAA. CAA. The very first word is cognitive stage. So in the cognitive stage, when I'm trying to teach someone how to do a specific skill, whether it be a weight and balance data form, performance data, or trying to show them a maneuver in the airplane, by first discussing it in the classroom, that is the cognitive stage. And as we go through and look at the cognitive stage, this is going to require every bit of the student's attention. If the student is not learning in the cognitive stage of training, they will not be able to make this information stick in the brain because they're just not paying attention. You'll find this a lot when people are actually deficient in this, because you'll be training with them or something and they'll say, "Now, what am I supposed to do next?" Like, "Man, you just weren't paying attention when I was telling you how to do all this stuff." The next one is the associative stage. So after you've taught someone something, and they've gotten to do this thing a couple of times, then we need to get to the associative stage. So the student has done their practice in the cognitive domain. They've done their practice. They've got kind of good at it, but the student can now do things like assess. Like when I say, "Hey, how was your steep turn?" "Well, it really wasn't that good." And I go, "What do you think? Why you say that? What did you do wrong?" "Well, I let as soon as I rolled in, I allowed the nose to drop, and I went down below my altitude." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, good." So you are at the associative stage. Very good. I really want to try to get them to the automatic response stage. Automatic response is, in short, the way I look at it is, I don't have to say anything. You're automatically doing it as my student. Like, I don't have to correct you. Meaning that when we're doing a steep turn and you start to lose altitude, you correct automatically back without me saying anything. I'm just sitting there going, "Good. Perfect. I deem that you can do a steep turn very well because you have reached the automatic response stage." And at that particular time, they can do the maneuver, but they can probably do other things while they're doing the maneuver. Like, for instance, if I could get you as a CFI applicant to the automatic response stage while flying, you could probably do other things while you're doing that, like talk. Like talk to your student about how to do the freaking maneuver. Automatic response stage. What a wonderful thing when you realize how all this stuff kind of clicks together, Because I didn't really know this when I first started this, and learning all this stuff, it really kind of makes you see how all this stuff comes together. And we can only get good at this stuff if we practice. The FAA, in their handbook there, the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, list some ways that we do practice. And there's 3 different ways. Our acronym here is DBR, Delta, Bravo, and Romeo. And the very first type of practice is called deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is where maybe I have something, but I don't really want you to do the whole thing. I just want to practice this one deliberate thing. And I may not know what it is at the time. I just have to kind of look and see how your performance is before I can do it. Because remember, practice is doing things over and over again. Over and over again. I personally, let's stick with steep turns. I personally believe that when I'm working with steep turns, I love to be able to see the person roll into the turn, hold the nose up. When I see that, then I'll say, "Okay, roll out," and I'll have them roll out and push the nose back down. And then we'll do the other way, roll up, roll out, and push the nose back down. And I don't even have them start the steep turn. I have them do deliberate practice on the roll in and roll out. Because if they roll in and the nose automatically goes down below the horizon, the maneuver's shot. So I have them do deliberate practice on the roll in and the roll out. Deliberate practice. The next one is called blocked. Blocked, it's so incredibly common, but if people don't know how to combat it, block practice is where you do something, just like this one thing, and you're doing it good, but you have no idea about the concept of what you're doing. Let's talk about what happens when, let's say a multi-engine trainer. They practice a lot on losing one of the engines. So every single time your student has an engine failure, you have taught them to maintain directional control, pitch, attitude, airspeed, and do these very serious things of events. Pull the gear up, pull the flaps up, mixture full rich, prop full forward, throttle full forward. A series of events, whatever the way you were taught, okay? So a series of events the way you do that. And some of those events may not be relative to all phases of flight. If I lose an engine in cruise flight and I'm cruising, why do I want to talk about gear and why do I want to talk about flaps? That has no play on what we're doing. We should just have enough information in our head to understand when this whole entire sequence of events is relative. And it's not all relative. It's not all relative for every single phase of flight. And how do I know this for you? Like, Todd, I don't know if that's true. I think it's pretty real. I really think you should do that. I really think you should check the gear or pull the gear and pull the flaps up every time. And I'm going, okay, so let's find out a scenario where that doesn't work. When I used to do DPE work and I would be on a quarter mile, half mile, 1 mile final in a multi-engine airplane, and I would reach up and pull the throttle lever down to idle. You know what on some of the applicants I would see? Full power on the good engine, mixture prop full forward, gear up and flaps up, and we fly over a perfectly good airport because in their mind, the only thing they can think about is maintain direction control, pitch attitude, airspeed, gear up, flaps up, all this crap they're trying to rush out of their mouth like that. I'm like, no, stop. No way. You don't need to do that. The whole concept of what you're trying to do is not correct. So that's a good example to me of block practice where you're doing something over and over and over, but the whole concept of it you're not really getting. In single engine, this would be like engine loss on the upwind. You know, what is your procedure for that and what are you doing? Because you're probably doing a lot less than what you could be doing if you actually learned everything there was to know about the maneuver and which way you could go and how to handle it and best places to land. Anyway, random practice. I like random practice. I don't like doing the same thing over and over again. Diversion. Where do we go on a diversion? The instructor just goes, take me there. That's not a diversion. The diversion is where you random it up. So the very first time I get a diversion, I'm going to teach the diversion. The second time I go up, I'm going to go, remember that thing I showed you yesterday, that thing called diversion? Yeah. All right. Take me to that airport. And that'll be the last time I say that. The next time we go up, I go, wow, there's a big cloud, a big black cloud out in front of us. And I don't think we can go around it. I don't think we can go above it. And we dig, I'm sure, ain't going underneath it. So what are your options? Are they telling me that they're going to divert? Well, then that's good. I don't, oh man, oh my God, my stomach. I don't feel well. Take me to the closest airport quickly. Hurry. I don't feel well at all. That's a diversion. So don't just say, divert me, instructor. Give them something worth diverting for. ADM, aeronautical decision making, more than one choice. Can't just say one thing all the time. Deliberate, blocked, random. You're getting ready to go take off. In the event of an engine failure or any abnormality, what most people say when they're giving their takeoff briefing. What's an abnormality? When do we abort a takeoff in a single engine airplane? I ask clients that all the time. Never. Like, wow. What would you do then if you had wasp in the plane? You go down there in the Cessna that hadn't been rented in a while, and you go down the runway, and this air starts blowing through those vents, and the mahogany wasp come out. Those red wasps come out. Oh my God, I've had that happen before. You talking about, man, it was a terrible thing. I drove the airplane right into the grass. Luckily, I missed the lights because I'm allergic to bee stings. So I drove the airplane right in the grass and just got out, pulled the mixture, stopped the airplane, got out and ran from the plane because I thought I was going to get stung. There was like 20 wasps in that freaking plane. I can't believe I didn't get stung. But that was a good example for me because then I had another reason for avoiding the takeoff, even though I had to go to the extreme. And luckily I didn't damage the plane or anything on the airport, otherwise the FAA would have got involved. But how many ways are you going to tell your student to abort the takeoff? Door pops open. Abort. Airspeed doesn't come alive. Abort. Performance numbers not where they say. Abort. Baby crying in the back. Who put a baby in the back? Abort. Okay? Think about that. There is no better way to deal with this practice for a student and to build their ADM skills than to get really, really good at developing a good scenario. A good scenario is key. And once you build a good scenario, that'll be like with you for life. I mean, you'll have this. I have very specific scenarios that I use, and they never get old. Because, once you teach it to a private pilot student, you can teach it to every private pilot student, and it'll just never get old. Like, this is a really good scenario for learning that. So a good scenario, what makes a scenario a good scenario? Well, it has a very, very, very clear set of objectives. What are you trying to test? What are you trying to evaluate? What are you trying to understand about this client? Second one is tailored to the needs of the student. What is the student needing to learn? What are they specifically trying to achieve by doing this particular scenario? No two students learn alike, and there are certain things that in the private stage of training that are not relevant to the commercial stage of training, and vice versa. So it has to be tailored to the needs of the student. It'll also capitalize on the subtle differences of the local environment. If I am flight training out of Seattle, Washington, I better have a lot of scenarios involved around drizzling rain. If I am flight training out of Phoenix, Arizona, I have to concentrate on having a little bit of water with me all the time while I'm training because of the environment there. If I'm training in Savannah, Georgia, I need to know that convection fog is going to play a pretty big role in my morning duties as an instructor. May cancel a lot of flights. So you got to take these scenarios and be very specific for the area that you're trying to do this. And the good thing about that, practicing these very realistic scenarios with the student will actually better resemble the environment in which they're actually going to be flying in. And don't you want to do that as an instructor? Sure you do. You want your student to be a genius at these things, to be a wonderful person at these things. And there's so many different things you could do it on. Changes in weather, system failures, change in terrain, day, night, a lot of things. So think about that. Think about when you're trying to design those scenarios, how that will work. But along the way, when people are trying to learn, they're not going to get everything correct every time. They're not. They're just not. No one does it 100% correct when they're training. And so there's going to be some errors that could be made. And of these errors, we like to talk about two. One's called a slip. One's called a mistake. The slip is when a person plans to do one thing, but then they inadvertently do something else. This is an error that is an error of thought. An error of action. I apologize. It's an error of action. And if you omit a necessary thing or you confuse two similar things, What is the difference between a pilot operating handbook and an aircraft flight manual? Well, nothing. POH is devised by the manufacturer, and the aircraft flight manual is devised by the FAA. And if you look in your POH, it probably says Pilot's Operating Handbook and FAA approved aircraft flight manual. So, is the thing that you have on your iPad, is that the POH for the plane? And the answer is no. What is that? Well, that's called a PIM, a Pilot Information Manual. You'll see that if you have one downloaded for the Skyhawk. You don't see it a lot on the Piper models. You see it a lot on the Cessna models. So those three items, very similar, PIM, PO, and AFM, very similar. They're not the same. They're three different objects. And for you to think that they're the same, that would not be a good thing. That would be a slip. You just slipped up. You just didn't know. It's kind of different things. You know. But then you have things that are not good, like a mistake. A mistake is when you plan to do the wrong thing and you're successful. Say you're training in the gear, an airplane that has retractable landing gear. And let's say that in this aircraft that there's a button that you can press which will suppress or silence the gear warning horn. So if I were to decrease my throttle in the aircraft, I would hear an audible warning horn based off the system saying, hey dummy, you're pulling that power way back too far. I think you're landing. So here's an audible warning horn to make sure that you got the gear down. So instead of hearing that gear warning horn as an instructor, because I'm trying to talk my student through this gear, through this problem, through this engine failure or something that we're having to deal with. So I can't hear what's going on. My student can't hear what's going on because they got the sound. So I reach up there and I hit that gear silence button. And then we take the training all the way down to the concrete and skid across the concrete because we landed with our gear up. That would be a mistake. That would be a mistake. Do you know what the very first thing you would do if you ever geared up landed an airplane? What is the very first thing you'd ever do after you gear up land an airplane? Do you know what it is? I'll tell you what it is. You want to put the gear lever in the down position. You want to do that before the FAA gets out there. Put the gear lever in the... That's funny to me. I don't care. That's funny right there. How do you know you've landed with your gear up? Anybody know that? How do you know when you've landed with your gear up? I'll tell you how you'll know you've landed with your gear up, because it'll take you full power to taxi to the ramp. Think about that. We're going to go on to the next one. So we don't like these errors. We don't want to have slips and mistakes. So how do we reduce these? Well, we go to the good doctor. The good doctor is going to help us to memorize these things, and we have an acronym called Dr. Colt. Dr. Colt. D-R-C-U-L-T, Dr. Colt. The very first one is develop routines. Standardized procedures, standard flows. We love standardized items in aviation. Standardization. That is the key to success. We love standardization. Standardize everything, and that will definitely good. So develop routines and standardized flows, really, really good. Raising awareness. How can we raise awareness? Well, we as instructors have to teach our students to be constantly aware of out-of-the-ordinary situations. Diversion to an airport or an unfamiliar airport we've never been to, changing weather conditions along our route. We have to constantly be on the aware of these things and raise that awareness. If our awareness is raised, we'll be more situationally aware. We'll be able to handle it through what we've learned through ADM and scenario-based training. Check for errors. How do I check for errors? Well, I just have to constantly look around and be situationally aware. Oh, that doesn't look right. What is that? Oh, it's low oil pressure. Oh, how do you know it's low oil pressure? Well, it's not in the green. Oh, okay. We need to handle that, I guess. Yeah, we need to handle that. Using reminders. A lot of you already do this as pilots. You already do this. Using reminders. You'll set your heading bug for like the wind or the runway you're going to take off on or something like that, so that way you won't forget it. 435 Alpha, taxi to runway 13 via Charlie. And you put your heading bug on 13 so you'll know which runway you're going to. Or whatever you use. There's tons of different things we use in the airplane to be able to do that. Learning and practicing. What a great way to actually reduce error. Higher knowledge and skill will always lead to fewer mistakes, to fewer errors, always. Taking time and don't rush. Never, ever, ever trade out speed for accuracy. Don't do it. When you start working too fast in the airplane, that is a telltale sign that your workload has increased and you need to get that under control, because now you're starting to get into risk management crazy like. So those are some ways that we can actually do that. You know, we talked about at the first part of this, the information processing theory, and we talked about our body and how it kind of brain, how it acts like a computer. And so let's talk about memory and forgetting. So the types that we have, 3 different types of memory that we use. And first off, it's our sensory memory. We see it, we hear it, we touch it, we smell it. That's our sensory memory. It comes and goes pretty quick. Pretty quick. Then if it's worthwhile, we're like, oh, we probably need to know that. 435 Alpha, taxi to runway 13 via Charlie, Delta, hold short of runway 33 at taxiway Lima. Boop, goes into the next one called short-term memory. And we're like, okay, I need to memorize that, but only for a short period of time. I don't need to retain it for like forever. Short-term. Then, if something is grained upon us, and we're like, oh, that's pretty important, it immediately gets shoved into long-term. And sometimes if we keep doing things over and over and over again, we think it's long-term memory, but it's really not. It ends up being like short-term memory. Like these people out there that say, it's like riding a bike. No, it's not. Let me tell you, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I used to do freestyle bicycle stuff. And I used to do all these crazy maneuvers like cherry pickers and crazy maneuvers I would do on a bicycle. If you tried to put me on a bicycle today and try to do any of that stuff, I would kill myself. So don't sit there and blow that towards me that just because you still, just like riding a bike, that's not true. That was very short-term memory for me. I still remember how to do it. I'm just not proficient at it. And long-term memory is going to be where you still know something. I know for a fact when I feel something that's hot, it's probably hot. And when I feel something that's wet, it's probably wet. If I feel something that's cold, it's probably cold. That's long-term memory. Those are ingrained upon your memory. It's very adamant that those are long-term, and it has to be stored so that way you can recall it. There's a lot of things that can come in between your inability to recall. We'll talk about that in a minute. So why do we forget? Well, I have an acronym here. It is called REFERS, R-I-F-R-S, a little reefer will help you forget. REFERS is the acronym, REFERS. And say the first one is one that we probably all had a problem with. It's called retrieval failure. Like you're in a check ride and designated examiner asks you a question, and you're like, that's, God, dang it, that's, we just talked about this yesterday. That's, I don't know. I'm sorry, I have retrieval failure. Okay. The next thing is interference. You have something new you've learned. It's very similar to an old something that you learned, and now they're overlapping one another. Like if you go from one airplane to another airplane, like you know how to fly, but you didn't know about the G1000 avionics versus the six-pack avionics. Or maybe you've been flying G500, now you go over to G1000 perspective. Well, there you go. Where I have instances like this is when I drive my car and then I drive my wife's car. And I pull out of the driveway and I touch the brake and my head hits the steering wheel. Because I'm like, my God, that is incredibly sensitive brakes. Well, because I've been driving my car, a little bit of interference going on there. Fading. Once we get hot and heavy into this course, and we start talking about things like weather and airspace, and you're like, man, I ain't talked about that in a long time. Yeah, it's a little fading going on. When we get to there, I'm gonna start dropping some of these FOI things on you. Be busting out some FOI jokes here in the next couple of weeks. But that's fading. You just hadn't used it a long period of time. Probably don't know how to use it. Like if I ask, some of you have been out of school for a long time. If you took calculus or geometry or something like that, and I asked you to do some of that stuff, some trig, could you still do it? Probably not, because it's just faded away. We talked about repression when we talked about our defense mechanisms on our Area of Operation 1 Task A, and how that can be embedded into the subconscious. But what if we had something that was like that, very similar to that, but we did it consciously? Well, that's called suppression. I'm going to suppress my feelings. My wife, we're having company over, and she gets pissed off at me, and as she's walking to open the door, she turns around and looks at me and goes, I swear to God, wait till they leave. I swear to God. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm glad she's suppressing this, because I definitely don't want to hear this now. And she pushes those feelings down, and she opens up the door. Hey, y'all, come on in. And she's all happy-go-lucky, and she's not mad at me anymore. She's suppressing those things. Sometimes our memory can get suppressed as well. Sometimes we force things, so our memory can suppress, like she did. She had to suppress those things I did to make her mad, so she suppressed them. Just a conscious form of forgetting. That's all it is. So what can we do as educators and as students to help ourselves learn things? Well, imagine a big light bulb going over your head. Mr. Lamp can help with that. Mr. Lamp, M-R-L-A-M-P, Mr. Lamp. So first off is if you have that law of exercise going on all the time, then you can say that meaningful repetition aids your recall. Meaningful repetition will aid recall. So meaningful repetition means you do the law of exercise, but it's meaningful. There's something that goes into it that makes it fun or exciting, and it just works for you. And that's very, very important. Recall is prompted by association. So you can access your info if you associate it with something that you're going to learn or something that you have learned. And you pretty much all done this before in your life, where someone couldn't think of something, so you do some association with it. Sounds like two syllables, whatever. I'm not sure how that other thing goes into the whole that. And I'm not sure if that's right. But you know what I'm talking about. So the recall is prompted by association. What is that? What is that acronym for recall, for retention of learning? The lamp, the light bulb, Mr. Lamp. There we go, Mr. Lamp. That probably is recall is prompted by association. Learn with all the senses is most effective. We've already talked about this. The more senses that you have is more effective. Hands down, more effective. Favorable attitudes will aid in retention. If you have a person that doesn't want to know something, they're not going to want to know it. And if you're looking at people trying to learn this material, kind of dry, you got to put a little bit of salt and pepper on it, season it up a little bit. It's very hard to learn because there's no favorable attitudes there for learning the FOIs, besides just finding a good FOIs teacher. Mnemonics, we will talk about that in a minute. I'm going to have a separate section on that, so I'm going to push that here for about a minute or two until we get to that slide. Mnemonics, that's one of them. And then last one is praise will stimulate recall. If you tell your student they're doing a good job, they will retain that information. I guarantee you. Why? Because they want to hear that from your mouth again. They want that pat on the back. They want to hear that they did a good job. It's very, very important to a student. Let's go talk about mnemonics now. I think a lot of you use mnemonics all the time. especially in aviation and any of the prior military people, you know, we love our acronyms. We eat acronyms for dinner. We love us some acronyms. So acronym is a type of mnemonic. We take the first letter of each word and then we form it into another word. A tomato flames, grab card, flaps, aviates. All different type of acronyms you've had to learn already in aviation. Acrostics. Acrostics are one we use a little bit, but acrostics is where we do take a certain letter of something, and it does form a sentence or a word, but it's not like a mnemonic. It's like if I said, every good boy does fine. Well, do you know what that is? It has to deal with music. And those who are familiar with music know what every good boy does fine means. What if I said, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally? What does that mean? Well, it deals with mathematics and the events in which we actually solve equations. So those are all acrostics. Then we have rhymes. So you create a rhyme to help you learn something. Who sailed the ocean blue in 1492? Of course, we know that because we probably know that rhyme. We can even use rhymes for pretty complex things to like include math. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how do your polynomials subtract? Well, I change the sign of my subtrahend and add as a matter of fact. There you go. You can take that one with you free of charge. No charge for that one. And then you have chaining, and we're good at chaining. Pilots are great at chaining. Chaining is like just reading a set of directions like a baking a cake. And we do it with ourselves because we do like a checklist. And that is a form of chaining there. Those are all forms of mnemonics. You know, while we're learning something, we can actually take something that we know and add it to something that we don't know. And when we do that, that is called a positive transfer of learning. So we can take these things that we've learned and we can help us learn something else. Like for instance, if I teach you rectangular course first, you'll pick up on the pattern like that. If I teach you slow flight first, you'll pick up on slow flight. You'll pick up on short field landing. Oh, a little memory lapse there. You can pick up on these things pretty easy. That's called a positive transfer of learning. But you can also have a negative transfer of learning, and we have that a pretty good bit in aviation. Why is it so difficult to teach someone how to taxi? Why do they want to keep their hand on the yoke while they're doing that? Well, because they just drove their car to their flight lesson, and they don't understand the concept. That's a negative transfer of energy. A negative transfer of learning. I'm so very sorry. I don't know why I'm making these mistakes. But let me say it again so that makes you understand it. If I'm doing something and it hinders the process of the other one, that's called a negative transfer of learning. Negative transfer of learning. As an instructor, you have to plan for that. You have to plan for that person getting in that airplane and they start to taxi away and they're wanting to go like this to make that turn. You go like, you're like, hey, just take your hands off that. It doesn't do anything. And you can have a little fun with that too. Just don't tell them anything about it and then have them pull forward. So, just pull forward and give me a right-hand turn, but don't tell them about the pedals. And then when they start going forward, you take the left pedal and go to the left, and as they're starting to turn a yoke to the right, you go like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? And then when they start freaking out, you go, nah, I'm just joking with you. That's not how we use our foot pedals. Nah, I'm just joking. Sometimes that's funny, sometimes it's not. To me, it's funny. Okay. So plan for that as a primary objective to have that transfer. I'm having too much fun today with this video, folks. I'm telling you, the more I talk about this stuff, the more I get entailed with it. I love it. And so when we're looking at these learning theories and how the learning is achieved, if we don't address this as instructor and learn how our students learn and how we learn and how we can help others learn and things that go into the learning process, our students will never learn what they need to learn and actually retain that information for future reference when they actually need it during the check ride or in real life. Let me look over my lesson plan, make sure I covered everything. And do you have any questions? I'm sure if you do have questions, you'll post it down below. Not as long as what I thought was going to be on this video. We went right through there and I didn't skimp at all. I gave you the full Monty. About an hour and 15 minutes that took me to do that, so a little bit over. And again, I can't thank you enough for joining me to learn this information. I love talking about FOIs, and I love more talking about regs. When we get into regs, you're going to see a really, really happy cat over here because I love talking about regs. And I'll tell you the reason why I like talking about regs. I like talking about regs because if you don't understand Part 61, you'll never be a proficient instructor. The sheer title of Part 61 says how to certify a pilot or a flight instructor, which is literally your life now as you go through and learn how to be a flight instructor. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm Todd Shelnut with CFI Pro. Please tell everybody you possibly can if you had a great experience. And if you've had a bad experience, you don't like this, put those comments down there. Let me hear them. I'm always trying to improve myself. I want to get better. I want to do better, and I want to help you be better too. I want to help you be the best CFI candidate there is out there. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.